Welcome to another edition of How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs. Almost all of our shows are really cool, but this is going to be extra cool because we are going to talk about some things and some techniques that you can use to improve your life that very, very few therapists and psychologists and life coaches know. So you don't want to tune out on this one. Jane is our guest today from across the pond in England. Jane, how are you today?
I'm great.
Awesome. Well, as we always do, we always start with a meaty, hard-hitting question right off the bat. So, Dr. Elliott, you prefer to be called Dr. Elliott or Jane?
You can call me Jane, please.
Okay. All right. So you had a massive shift in your life back in 2005 when you moved from the Midwest, which I spent 2 years at going to college in Wisconsin. So absolutely love the Midwest. And in 2005, you had this significant transition where you went to England. How has that journey influenced your focus on talent and avoidance, what we're talking a lot about today? And what drove you to specialize in this area with your clients?
Okay. Well, I should probably clarify that I actually moved from Philadelphia, which is not the Midwest, but I did grow up in the Midwest. I'm originally from Michigan. And I spent most of my life as what I call a white knuckler, which is someone who has a super clear idea of what they want to do with their talents and is like going after it, but just suffering like heck in the process. So after I got my PhD, I got this great postdoctoral fellowship. This is just an example. And I'd only gone to public institutions all my life, University of Illinois, et cetera. And then I got this fancy postdoc. I'm in this Ivy League university in an office that was like remodeled 5 minutes before I got there. And I would be sitting there like looking out the window at this gorgeous leafy quad surrounded by beautiful buildings and like smelling the new carpet smell. And it was like everything I had been working towards, everything I'd wanted, and I just couldn't work. Like it would take me 6 hours of screwing around to squeeze like 20 minutes of writing out of myself. And this is what my professional life was for years. Like I inched along and I got decent results because I was actually good at the work when I could get myself to do it. And I didn't give up. So I kept going, but it was like so much harder than it needed to be. It was like I was just dragging a 100-pound weight around me, everywhere I went. And by the time I figured out how to actually get rid of that weight, which I did, I was a professor and I was working with these incredibly talented junior colleagues and PhD students. And they were just like me. They were spending so much time when they could have been doing great things, just trying to get themselves to engage. Like they were doing this thing they'd always wanted to do, just like me sitting in that office, and they were miserable. And I just thought nobody else should have to spend 20 years figuring this out. So I started sharing my methods and I started using them with my PhD students and I started sharing them online and people started getting really good results. And so I eventually felt like I didn't want to just limit that to academia because I've always had friends, obviously, outside of academia. And I knew that it wasn't just us inside, the university system that had this problem of feeling like I know I can do something and I want to do it. So why can't I? And that is how I became a coach who helps high achievers overcome avoidance.
So Jane, what were you teaching to these students?
The people that I was helping to overcome their avoidance, or what was my academic specialty?
Yeah, like what was a typical class? What was a class called that you were teaching?
I was teaching classes like contemporary, the contemporary novel fiction after 1999. So things like that. I was teaching contemporary literature.
Gotcha. Yep. And what was it that after 20 years you figured out, oh my gosh, this is how I can break free from this pattern of avoidance?
I think that it was a slow process of attrition, and that's why I don't want other people in my boat because I can't, like, it was just, it was like just carving it away bit by bit by bit, figuring out what was in my way and removing it, figuring out what thoughts I was having that were getting in my way and working on those. And that's why it took so long. There was no like epiphany, right? It was just like all of this struggle to understand why I couldn't work and how to fix it. I think the thing that I had to my advantage was that I always knew that people hold themselves back. I always knew that people stymie themselves. And so I knew that there was a reason that I felt so stuck. And one of the things that inspired this viral article that I wrote on internal resistance was I was coaching a client who had all of these, to my mind, kind of obvious reasons that success would be complicated for her. You know, she came from a background where her success had already far outstripped other people that she was related to. There was a lot of complexity around betrayal and class, and she just didn't know that. She was like, why can't I do it? And I was like, well, you have resistance to this achievement. And she was like, and I came away from that thinking, oh my God, they don't know about the resistance. They don't know. They're out there just trying to do things and they don't know they have resistance. So I wrote this article called You're Not Lazy or Undisciplined. You Have Internal Resistance. And it became one of the, top 12 stories or whatever on Medium that year, because apparently a lot of people didn't know about resistance.
So can you explain that concept of internal resistance, and then what is and how memory reconsolidation can help overcome this barrier?
Yeah. So internal resistance is that 100-pound weight that I mentioned, right? It's that thing that we're dragging along that's making it feel so hard. And so I think the best way to understand it, is if I back up a bit and first say something about how we usually think about avoidance or procrastination or sort of letting ourselves down. And I think the way we usually think about it is in terms of being good and being bad. So like we're bad when we're procrastinating, but if we had more control and discipline, then we'd be able to be good. And that's what I was thinking, like sitting in that postdoc office with the new carpet smell. I was like, look at me being a lazy, undisciplined scholar. I need to be better. And I was trying so hard to be better, to like have more control over myself. And I think you see this in the coaching world when you hear people talking about like lizard brain, like, oh, our primitive brain doesn't want to do hard things. So we need to use our prefrontal cortex to overpower the lizard brain. And that just kind of assumes that our default setting is like, don't do stuff. And so there's nothing to know there. There's nothing to investigate. We are just, if we can't do stuff, it must be because we're lazy and we're using our lizard brain. But I just don't think, I have never thought that laziness is powerful enough to explain long-term high stakes avoidance, right?
I agree.
Like if laziness was powerful enough that it could defeat my drive to like enjoy that office that I'd worked so hard for, there's no way I'd ever like unload the fucking dishwasher or whatever, right? Like if laziness was that powerful, we wouldn't do anything. So this has made me kind of always think that there is something besides laziness or being undisciplined that is getting in the way in those moments. And I call that thing internal resistance. And so you can think about this in terms of moving from like the good, bad paradigm I just talked about to what I think of as the yes, no paradigm. So instead of us having a tendency to be bad and lazy, which we should overcome by being good, we have something in us that is saying yes to the task. So like something in me was like, yes, use this office, do good work, let's go. And something in me was like, no, absolutely not. We are not doing that. Stop. We will sit here screwing around on the internet for the next 5 hours. And that no, that's the internal resistance. And that no has to be powerful because it's forceful enough to push back on a yes that is like very strong and important to us. And in my case, I had that yes about making sense of the postdoc, but I also had this no, which eventually I understood was about how intimidated and outclassed and terrified I felt at that institution. And it's because both the no and the yes are so powerful that it feels like a battle. Like when you're suffering long-term avoidance, you're just being like ground between the yes and the no. And that's why it sucks so much. And that's the other reason that I think that the laziness explanation isn't very good, because it sort of suggests that we're enjoying ourselves. But when you are stuck in long-term avoidance and you can't get yourself to work, you're not enjoying that time on Netflix. You're not enjoying that time screwing around on Twitter or whatever. You are miserable. You're like, what is happening? I'm doing it again and I can't stop.
So Jane, in your situation, your brain was protecting you from something that it thought was worse, right?
Hmm.
And while you had this negativity around avoidance, and if I'm avoiding, then I can't get the work done, and that's going to cause more negativity. It was your brain's perceived solution to a problem that it thought was worse, right? And I think
Yes,
you just mentioned
absolutely.
you mentioned that problem, and that problem
Yep.
was like you felt outclassed at this institution. You felt like you
Yep.
shouldn't have been there. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that it was a slightly more shaded than that, in that I think that I'd gone there to revise my dissertation as a book, right? That was my role. That was my job while I was there. And in order to do that, I was taking my book into places, I was taking my research into places that were more idiosyncratic, more individualistic, more based on my own interests. And that's like a self-reveal, right? That was going to require me to ante up more of who I really was and really show that. Meanwhile, I'm in this place where I'm very worried that who I really am
Oh,
isn't
wow.
exactly the right person, right?
Wow. So
So
you couldn't be your authentic self.
I was afraid to.
Afraid.
I wasn't, that year I also got an academic job, and those aren't easy to get. So like I said, I was always like inching along. I did write that book, but I was like fighting myself the whole way.
Wow. So
Yeah.
tell us about memory reconsolidation. What is it, and how can it overcome a barrier like this?
Okay. So once you know you have internal resistance, you get two pieces of what you need to overcome the avoidance. So piece one is like, you're actually avoiding your task for a reason, right? There's a no in there. And then piece two is you hopefully, and I think usually, get curious about the reason. So you kind of shift from like pointless questions like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? To like actually useful questions like, why might some part of me not want to do this thing? So those are the first two pieces, and memory reconsolidation is the third one because of where this no is coming from in the brain. I think with the kind of strong no that you get with long-term avoidance, you are dealing with an emotionally charged rule that you learned about reality at some point. So we could say my rule was something like, things don't go well when you show who you really are. Okay. And these rules are things about how the world works, who we are, what we're allowed to have, what's likely to happen. I mean, it can be things like relationships don't work out, or like, you can't trust the boss, or whatever. These are the kind of rules about reality we have, and they get stored in what's called implicit memory, which doesn't update under normal conditions. So you can encounter however much evidence counter to this rule, and the rule will stay completely intact unless you use memory reconsolidation. Memory reconsolidation is the process by which you can rewrite these rules. So rather than just putting down new evidence, new pathways, you go into the original pathway, you change the rule. And that means that part of you that's been like, no, 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 is just stands down. They no longer have a rule telling them they have to get in your way. And I was so relieved when I found out about this, not just because I've now done memory reconsolidation on myself, and I work with someone who I do it with, but also because it helped me understand when therapy had worked and when it hadn't, like what things had actually changed things for me and what hadn't, right? So I could see that sometimes I'd actually achieved memory reconsolidation without even knowing what it was. But it has to happen. In order to do that, you have to follow these specific steps. You need to access the memory in a certain way. You have to then experience something that mismatches the original memory, and it has to happen in a specific sequence and a specific number of times. But if you have those three things, if you have like knowledge that there's a no in there, the commitment to figuring out what the rule is for, what's causing the no, and you have memory consolidation, you can just eradicate long-term avoidance. It's not a better strategy for coping with it. It's just gone.
Gone.
I have this colleague who, if me sitting in that office, my internal resistance, like my yes to doing that work was like a 51 and my no was like a 49, right? So I was like inching along. I have this colleague who, I think his yes for doing this kind of work, doing his academic work, is like a 95. His no is like a 5. Like his no may actually be like, oh, I'd rather lay on the couch for 10 minutes or whatever. And I used to look at him. I remember we were in this noodle bar in London, and he just finished his second book, and he was so excited about his third book, and just no fear, no, like just full steam ahead. And I was like, this fucking guy, like I just was like, how do these people exist? And now I'm that guy.
And I'm that person too with this work. It's incredible.
Yeah, I'm that guy. And my clients are that guy now.
Yeah.
Like I have a reliable process to producing that guy out of people who are desperate to like write the novel or build the business or whatever. It's incredible.
So you said so many important things that we're going to break down, but if you only take one thing from this entire podcast, it was when Jane talked about getting into curiosity over judgment. We spend so much of our lives judging ourselves and judging other people. Why can't I do this? Why can't I stop drinking? Why can't I stop smoking? Why am I depressed? Why am I anxious? Why do I work 60 hours a week, even though it's hurting my marriage and kids? Well, first of all, get into curiosity and you'll start to figure it out. But second, if you're doing any of those things, it's not your fault. It's exactly the reason that Jane was doing what she was doing. Your brain is coming up with this block because it thinks it's protecting you from something that's even worse. And when you figure out, when you do the work, that thing that we always think is worse is nothing more than an untruth. It's something that we created typically as a child to get us through a stressful situation. Your brain was doing exactly what it should have been doing at age 6.
No, the rule always made good sense when it was created.
Yes.
Always.
Yes.
And that's the other thing I don't like about the good bad paradigm versus the yes no paradigm is that the part of us saying no is not bad.
Yeah.
They are not bad. They are just trying to be good with an outdated manual.
Yeah. So Jane, is this how most therapy works?
Well, no. I mean, most clients do not know about memory. Most therapists and most people don't know about memory reconsolidation. But it's interesting though, because memory reconsolidation is the only way that implicit memories update. Like we use techniques to do it, but it happens in the wild all the time, right? It's how we're not still in love with our high school boyfriend or whatever. Whenever we change our emotional relationship to something, it's because we've updated our rules. The problem is that because most therapists don't know about this process, it only happens in therapy kind of by accident.
By accident, right.
So because like one of the key steps is that you have to access the initial memory or a version of it, like a more recent one would be fine. And then you have to encounter what's called a mismatch. So something that challenges the rule that you believe in and that you experience. So, but it has to happen close together, right? Within a 5-hour window. It also has to happen twice, but let's just stick with the first time. So let's say my therapist and I go through this whole thing about some traumatic thing that happened to me in 5th grade or whatever.
Can you give us an actual example?
Sure. Yeah. So, this is an example actually. So one of the things that I actually use memory reconsolidation on myself on this memory, I had worked on this experience before, which was like, I was in this contest when I was like in 5th grade, and I was like captain of this team, and the team wound up performing horribly. It was like, I don't want to go into all the backstory, but it was like this shameful thing that had haunted me for years. And when I thought about it, I still felt just as ashamed as when I was like 12. Like it was completely unreconstructed in my brain. And I had talked about it in therapy before, but it's like, if you talk about the original experience in one session, and then the next session, you talk about how else you might interpret what had happened, you're not going to reconsolidate because you haven't brought them together. You have to reactivate the initial experience and then encounter the mismatch. But because therapists don't know that, they don't ensure that they happen together, right? Like once you know the steps, it's more, the complicated part is more about finding the right rule. But because therapists don't know the steps, it only happens by accident. So I did change through memory reconsolidation because that's really the only way deep change happens. It's just that neither the therapist nor I knew that's what was happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So the pathways that you're talking about, we have this one neural pathway that's saying, make up anything, that if we are our authentic self, people stop loving us.
Yep.
Then you go to most therapy, and the therapist will talk about, okay, well, let's do some positive reinforcement about how you are really loved. So now
Mhm.
you've created a new neural pathway, but these two kind of compete against each other. Why doesn't that work, and how is memory reconsolidation different?
Well, the reason it doesn't work is one of the reasons it doesn't work is that the more stressed out we are, the more likely we are to revert to the oldest pathway. So
Right.
you could spend 6 months practicing like my boss can't hurt me. I am safe at work. And then if he yells at you enough, you will revert right back to like I'm not safe. I need to get out of here. He's going to kill me, right? Um, but what memory consolidation does is it finds the well if if you do the discovery right, you find the original memory where that rule got created.
Right.
If a man yells at me, I'm not safe, for example, and you change it, which means the original pathway is now different. So there's no old pathway containing the rule that's causing the problem to revert back to. The old one is the new one. And
It's
that's amazing.
as our mentor Alan says, it's literally like going into an Excel spreadsheet and going into the cell, deleting what's in the cell, and writing over what's on the cell, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting too because I mean, I don't know how to do the process of memory consolidation, but I do a lot of imaginal work. And sometimes clients will say things like, "Well, but my mom wouldn't really say that." And I'm like, "Well, we have magic. Like we can put anything in that cell. Like it doesn't need to be realistic. It just needs to be something you can believe. If it's not realistic enough for you to believe it, that's one thing, but
So
um
it took you 20 years to figure this out. Is that how long the process takes now? Does it take 20 years?
no, it takes me my program is 3 months long. So, and I we get pretty amazing results in 3 months. I mean, it's very intensive. Like unlike most 3-month programs, we meet twice a week. So, I often say it's like a 6-month program crammed into 3, but I think that intensive and short works better for avoidant people. I just think, when I started putting this together, I was like, okay, how do I create a learning environment for avoidant people? Right? If you put a lot of rules in place to make sure they engage, they may immediately start judging themselves at the first dereliction and then, nope out. So I put a lot of thought into it. And one of the things I decided was I didn't want it to be too long. I didn't want people's brains to be able to tell them like, oh, you don't need to worry about that now. We'll deal with that in August, in month 5. It's like, no, we've got 3 months, twice a week. You're in it.
And
So that's the reason.
do you sometimes see massive shifts though before the 3 months are up?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, even before the 3 months are up. And one of the things that happens that's really interesting is it's sort of like these beliefs are often in layers. And so um, once you remove, I have to be super responsible because no one's watching the ball at home. Nobody, my parents aren't watching the ball at home. I need to be the adult in the room. Once you get rid of that rule, then maybe you find, school is the only place I'm safe and I have to do well here to keep that safe space, right? So it's like as you pull them away, you find more. But with each one, you get massive change for sure. Yeah.
Speaking of massive change, can you tell us? I know you've worked with so many clients over the years. Can you tell us like a client success story that kind of just, rises to the top when you think about them?
Yeah. So I have this client who she had just she hired me basically because she had been promoted into being the head of this new department at her work. And it was, she was going into a really chaotic situation and being asked to transform it. And she went into this complete crisis of confidence because she thought of herself as this very slapdash person, like missed deadlines, like didn't always return the email, like sort of piles on the desk, like ran out of gas kind of person, right? And her rule was, I cannot really be successful until I get rid of what she called chaotic girl. She needed to get rid of this figure. And as we did this work and figured out where this chaos was coming from and what was actually causing her to have to, make so much noise in her life, she actually realized that she didn't need to change any of those things in order to be amazing at this job. She was able to recognize that she wasn't appointed because she was good at email. She was appointed because she's amazing with people, and they trusted her to like draw this incredibly contentious group of people together through her vision. And it was such a great example of like good, bad to yes, no, because when she was so stuck in good, bad, all she could see was, I need to fix myself so I can do this job. Right. But what she actually needed to do was change her expectations of herself so that she could see that anybody could send an email, anybody could remind her of a deadline. She had this like, magic quality that was why they put her in this position. And I really, and she's just totally kicking ass at it now, and really enjoying herself too. And it was really amazing to watch because she was one of the people, I mean, almost everyone comes into these kind of programs wanting to be fixed, right? And one of the things I try to help people see is that really identifying with your talents and leaning into what you can do is about, rather than trying to fix who you are, it's about turning up the volume on who you are. And that's exactly what she did. She stopped trying to do the right job she thought she needed to do, and she went after it with her own particular magic.
Wow.
Yeah, just seeing her realize that the skills she had were more important than these administrative details she'd beaten herself up on for years was incredible.
So what was her, if you can share, what was her underlying story that was driving this behavior?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated to reveal. I think I wouldn't really be comfortable getting too specific, but but for a lot, I can be a little bit more generic, which is that a lot of people who basically, I work with people whose all of their self-esteem and all of their stuff about their value in the world has gotten like fused with what they can do, right? Either because they don't think they're doing it well enough or because they've always done it well and God forbid they stop for 5 seconds, right? And not everyone's wired like that. Like some people play that shit out in relationships, right? It's like the next partner will be the one and then they'll finally whatever. But my people are like this, doing this right, achieving this thing, getting this gold star is going to fix things. And but the problem is, well, there's lots of problems that happen with that. But the problem that was active in this case had to do with people often pay a really high price for achieving beyond their family of origin emotionally.
Yeah. Meaning if you out success your family, then bad things can happen.
Yeah, and there can be a lot of guilt, but there can also be, sometimes in moments where we really let ourselves succeed, we face things like, I couldn't save them, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you read Bruce Ecker's book, but he's a case study in there where a gentleman was a massive underachiever. And he found out that this underlying story that was driving this underachieving was, if I succeed, I'll let my dad off the hook for being such a bad dad. And I want to keep him on the hook because that's my only chance of ever reconnecting with him. And when he realized that was just an untrue story that he made up in childhood, everything in his life changed and he started to perform. So for 47 years, Jane, I thought I had high self-esteem. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering what your self-esteem is, or you're wondering, do I have some of these underlying things? Give yourself a treat. Go take 3 minutes out of your life and take this self-love quiz at bradchandler.com/quiz. And because all change begins with awareness. So see where you stand. See if you have some of these stories affecting. So Jane, as we wrap up, there's willpower is a topic of much debate.
Yes.
In your experience, why is willpower overrated when it comes to transforming our lives?
Well, you know how I talked about there's the yes part and there's the no part? The problem with willpower is that the no part also has willpower. It has a lot of willpower. So if the yes part ramps up its pressure, the no part will just ramp up its pressure. right? So
That is fascinating. I've never thought about it that way.
yeah.
The no often has more willpower than the yes.
Yeah, because
Oh
it
my
comes
gosh.
from a really old, embedded, emotionally charged rule,
Yes.
right?
Wow.
Like the no part will throw itself in front of a train to stop us. Like
Oh
it
my
is so
gosh.
determined. And so
Yes.
that's why I think willpower is just a misplaced tool. It's like I sometimes tell my clients, it's like trying to use willpower is like running at a door over and over, running at a locked door. Like, yeah, you might break it down eventually, but it's not that efficient. Like, what if we just unlock the door instead? Right?
Wow. I'm just wowed right now. That's such an insight. Mm.
So I really try to, I mean, I think what you said about curiosity um is really where things have to start, you know? And that's why I like the yes no, because I think my my people, my clients, people I work with tend to be very analytical. And if once they write down all the yeses, they start to get curious about the nos. And once they start to get curious, they will start to use their big brains to actually try to figure out what's happening in there. And that's so much more effective than running at a locked door over and over.
So I'm going to tell you a theory I have that
Yep.
I've taken. This is not Gabor Mate. Gabor Mate is one of my favorites in the world. He's just an
Mm,
amazing human being, and he's got this authenticity and attachment that all of us were
mm,
born with two primary needs. So I'm going to fuse your yes no with what he says, and then I'm going
mm.
to come up with my own theory. I want to hear your
Okay. Yeah,
opinion
yeah, let's hear
on
it.
it. So the yes is the what do we want? What is the outcome that we want? But the no is the powerful thing that is actually driving the negative behavior that we want to change that we can't. And that no is linked to attachment as a kid. So
Mm,
let me give you an example. I tell my mom that I hate her because she won't give me a cookie. She cries for 2 hours, and then dad comes home and hits me. So my learned belief is if I am my authentic self, love will get taken from me. If love gets taken from me, then I will die, because if I don't have, if I'm not attached to my parents, I'm going to die. So,
mm,
Jane, my theory is that our adult brains are really just operating as a 6-year-old brain because our subconscious mind doesn't know time. So, I think these things that create anxiety or keep us stuck really go back to survival. I think
mm.
our brains literally go back to, if this happens, you might die. And that's why the willpower of the no overpowers the yes, because it's like a life or death thing. We're not thinking that. We don't say, hey, I've got to have this drink because if not, I'm going to die. But our subconscious is telling us that. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I don't think all the no's are attachments, but I think that if you have a no that is powering long-term avoidance, it is about a primal unmet need,
Yeah.
whether that's safety or protection or attunement
Yeah.
or, unconditional acceptance. One of
What
the
that's better said. You said it better. I didn't really mean attachment. I meant that if you didn't have that need, you could die.
Yeah. And I think that we are biologically wired to react to our parent to varieties of parents' emotional expression toward us as survival issues.
Love it. So if you,
I think that that's inherent. I really
yeah,
do, because you're a little helpless thing, if mom is mad, you could die if, in a certain scenario.
yeah. Yeah. So if you've got anxiety, depression, addiction, you drink too much, you've got a shitty marriage, like it's literally not your fault. You are doing what your brain thinks is
Yeah.
the right thing to do by just protecting itself. But through what we've talked about today and the work that Jane does and the work that I do, using memory reconsolidation, other techniques, like you don't have to go through 20 years of misery. I don't know
No.
if it was misery. You don't have to go through 3 decades of therapy like I did. Like
Mm-mm.
this work can be done in a matter of hours,
Yeah.
weeks, months, not years.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not going to say it's always fun, but it's interesting. It is so much more interesting to try to figure out how your brain is trying to protect you than it is to just sit in a chair and yell at yourself for why you're bad. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that, people get a lot out of my program is that they find it stimulating. Right. I mean, yeah, sometimes it's emotionally hard, but it's also fascinating to learn this much about yourself.
Reading Alan's book on a recent plane ride, I started to think about why was it when I was 22 years old that I got on the stage or the altar to say a reading at a wedding, and
Mm.
I was so nervous, Jane, that literally,
Mhm.
thank God there was something in front of me. My knees were shaking. I missed an entire verse, and I went back and I was like, why was that? So what happened was, as I walked to the stage, my body was like completely shutting down, like, don't go up there, it's danger. Well,
Yeah.
why was the danger there? Because my brain was saying, if you go up on stage and you mess up, you're going to be ridiculed, just like your father ridiculed you. And if your father's
Mhm.
ridiculing you, then he's taking away his love. And if he doesn't love you, there again, you lose the attachment and you can die. So
Yep.
I look back and I'm like, yeah, my body was actually, that anxiety was trying to protect me. It didn't serve me. So through this work now, I don't get I get a little bit nervous sometimes, but I don't get nearly as nervous when I get on stage. So anyway, this
That's
has been,
fantastic. Yeah,
this is,
no, I think it's a way to, when you're able to see the good intentions of the no, there I think it's a faster and more powerful route to self-compassion than just telling yourself like, oh, be self-compassionate. It's like you can actually see the good
yes.
intentions.
Yes. So this has been awesome, Jane. How can people best reach you if they want to talk with you, work with you?
Yes, JaneElliottPhD.com. It's 2 L's and 2 T's. And you can also over there take my quiz to find out what kind of self-eating brain you have. It's basically thinking about different avoidance styles, and then there's different tools you can get that will help you based on how your avoidance is playing out.
Beautiful. So go to take the time to take her quiz, take my quiz. We'll put them in the show notes. And again, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people radically change their lives. And I need your help. I can't do this alone. Jane and I can't do this alone. So how can we help? How can you help us? Just share this, give us a good rating, give us a review. Anyone who you know that's struggling or suffering, they don't have to be struggling or suffering. Have them reach out to Jane or myself, and we would be glad to help them.
All
Thank you
right.
so much, Jane.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me.
That concludes another episode of How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs. Until next time, remember, love heals all.